Today I'm going to compare Artstudio Pro with Procreate. Hi everybody, Steve Elliott here again. Today I'm looking at Artstudio Pro and Procreate together. I want to do a comparison. This isn't really one versus the other. I just want to see how they compare against one another from a traditional artist point of view. So I'm not going to be looking at this from how a photographer might use it, or somebody that makes comics, or more sort of stylized, digitized art, but just a traditional way of drawing. So I'm going to compare pencil tools, pastels, oils, and watercolors. So on the left of the screen you can see Procreate, and on the right Artstudio Pro. And I'll begin by just doing the same thing in each one. So I'm going to draw a circle, just using a pencil, and I've used all default tools in both apps. I haven't used any of my own brushes or brushes that I've imported. I have just used the default tools pretty much as they appear, without messing around with the settings at all. So what can I say? First of all, Procreate has not got any shapes that you can pre-select. So to draw a circle, you've got to freehand it in. In Artstudio Pro, you'll notice I use the select tool to create a circle, and then shaded within that, and then inverted the shape to do the shading around it. The downside with that was that it looked mechanical once I turned the select off, and you have to go around it with the pencil. There you can see it's looking a bit mechanical, so you do have to go around it again. But having said that, you do get a perfect circle very easy in Artstudio Pro that you can't do it in Procreate. As regards the pencils, I felt that the Procreate one had the edge. I think the brushes in Procreate are slightly more sophisticated, the ones than the ones in Artstudio Pro. But hey, Procreate's been around a long time. Artstudio Pro is fairly new on the scene, so I'm sure the brushes will get better. But having said that, I mean, if you look at the comparisons of the drawings, they are very similar, and there's not a lot to choose with the finished results. It's just that when I was using Procreate, I just sort of, maybe because I've used it a lot, it seemed very easy to just slide up the size of the brush for shading and so on and so forth. Whereas with the Artstudio Pro, especially with the shading, it was a lot more fiddly to get a nice smooth shading. There was some sort of texture appearing, like a sort of repeat circle when I was shading with the Artstudio Pro brush, which just wasn't happening with Procreate. And then I tried the deform tool just to put the shadow under the circle. No real reason to do that. I could have just sketched that in, but I just wanted to show you that they both add similar features there for duplicating a layer and then distorting, and both were easily accessible to do. That one wasn't any easier than the other. They both have a very different feel, and you do need to get used to one. And it would be very easy for me to say, oh, Procreate's so easy, everything seems so natural and it's all in the right place. But I've been using Procreate for over a year. I've only just started using Artstudio Pro, so I would say I need to just use it a little bit more. I mean, I've done some completed paintings in it, so I feel I've done enough to do a reasonable comparison. I know both apps reasonably well now. There's one or two things that confuse me in Artstudio Pro, and that is the pencil tool, the paint tool, and the wet paint tool. I don't know why I need to select them and then choose a brush separately. I feel it would be much better if you could just choose the brush and then it would automatically choose whether it's a wet brush or a pencil or so on. It might be, I mean, I tried messing around, selecting a brush and then changing it from pencil to paint and wet paint, but I couldn't see a deal of difference, but it might be very subtle, I don't know. But the way to get around that, both was the fact that you've got this sort of favorites, which is that little star icon, which I've just selected, and you can choose, you can add brushes to that. So before I did both these demos, I created, you could call them folders or you could call them categories or whatever you like, to put in the brushes I was going to use for this demo. And the nice thing about the favorites one in Artstudio Pro, once you add the brushes to that and you've sized it up and exactly how you want, it remembers that, so it chooses the right profile, if wet paint, pencil and paint, if profile is the right word. So that was really useful because I could just sort of dip in and out the brushes exactly as I wanted, which was the same in Procreate. You know, I created a category that I could just dump all the brushes in and get to them very easy. So with the Procreate, with the pencil sketches, sorry, and the pastels, well, mainly the pastels actually, because the pencil sketch is in black and white, but the pastels, I decided to use a palette rather than choosing colours off the colour wheel, just to see how easy that was. And they both have palettes. I used a default one in Artstudio Pro called Google, I think it was. Or it might have been, no, actually, it might have been Spectrum, and there was hundreds of colours in that, which made it quite difficult actually to keep sliding backwards and forwards with the colours. But that was my fault. I could have easily created a palette, and it's dead easy to add colours to a palette. And the last time I did a tryout of this, I said it was difficult to add colours to a palette, but in actual fact it's really easy. There's a little icon at the bottom of the screen that you just tap when you've got your colour selected, and it will add that to the selected palette. And Procreate's equally as easy. So creating palettes there was no difference. There was dead easy on both of them, and selecting colours from the palettes was, I suppose it was marginally easier in Artstudio Pro because the colours are all on the screen, and if you've got a very small palette, you could choose from them without having to keep opening up your colour wheel and then selecting the colour from the palette. So Artstudio Pro has the edge there. You'll notice I'm using different colours on each sphere, and that's no reason for that. I was just I did the Procreate drawing first, and then I went into the Artstudio Pro one. I didn't have the reference to look at, so I was just picking colours at random from the palette to shade in. So there's no reason why that why the different colours. It was just me just randomly picking colours. So I have to say, both the pastel pencils performed exceptionally well. Where Procreate had the edge easily, I think, over the Artstudio Pro pencil, in the pastels they were equally good. I couldn't choose which was better. They both performed exceptionally well and gave a realistic rendition to what I feel would be a pastel drawing. So there are features, I'll just talk about features very quickly, that are in Procreate that I couldn't find in Artstudio Pro, namely the mirroring tool, where you can sort of draw something in a mirror and then it appears at the side of it in sort of mirrored version. I couldn't find anything like that in Artstudio Pro. But then on the other hand, in Artstudio Pro, it had got a sampler tool where you can sample something, and then a cloning tool, I should say, where you could select something and then clone it. So if you was doing, say, a tree and you wanted to do a line of trees, you could very easily clone that. So that's available in Artstudio Pro, which I wouldn't necessarily use anyway, because I'd rather paint it. And there's a stack of tools in Artstudio Pro that you maybe a photographer would use, but you probably wouldn't use for painting. So there are a lot of features in Artstudio Pro that do not appear in Procreate, but probably aren't necessary from a painter's point of view. So I'm now going to move on to looking at oil paintings and watercolors. I'm going to do the oil painting first, and it's just a simple landscape, just selecting colors. This time I decided not to use a palette, but select colors from the color circle in the case of Procreate and the square in the case of Artstudio. So straight away, I'm thinking that the brushes in Procreate are a little bit more subtle and just seem a little bit more sophisticated, I think. But I have to say that in Procreate, if you use the wet brushes and especially the blending or the smudge tool, you can get some very subtle and soft effects. It just seems to me that in Procreate, you can do it straight off with the brush, where it may be that I just need to play around with the settings in Artstudio to get that same kind of subtleness, but they are already set up in Procreate. You don't have to fiddle about with it. You can just use them. But having said that, as you watch the painting progress, you'll see that they both have a lot to offer. The kind of I felt that the way the brushes work force you to paint in a particular way, or not force, but sort of you find yourself working in. I was definitely doing it different in Procreate to Artstudio Pro, and that was a response to the brushes and how they felt. But it wasn't detrimental. I'm not saying that. It just felt different, so I started to use them differently. I think once I'd got the colour on, a lot of colour in Artstudio, they blended and merged so much nicer and easier. Like you've got a lot of paint on the canvas, but initially when I was working with the sort of dry canvas with the colours, Procreate seemed a lot easier to manage. So there was ifs and buts about the two, pros and cons, and advantages and disadvantages about both. Just going off the painting for a little while, one thing that I do want to mention is that Artstudio Pro stores files directly to the cloud. It doesn't save it internally inside the app like it does with Procreate. And that's never ever been a problem for me. I wouldn't have even considered it to be an issue until this week, when I actually filled up all the hard drive space on my iPad Pro. The 128 gig was full, and it was all full of paintings in Procreate. And I was going away for a week, so I had to try and free up some space on the hard drive. The only way to do it was either just delete all the paintings in Procreate and lose them, or export them as I could either export them as Photoshop files or Procreate or PNG. I've already got them all as PNG, but that's obviously a flat file, and I wanted to keep all the layers, so I decided to export them as Procreate, not Photoshop, just in case there was some corruptions if ever I wanted to get back into them. I may never ever want to use them, but I felt I wanted to keep them. So it was a very long, laborious job. In fact, I still haven't done it. I've done about half of them. I've freed up about half the space to export all of those files in Procreate and then move them out of the cloud onto an hard drive to free up the cloud space, because it was just plugging that up as well. Whereas with Artstudio Pro, you can see them all nice and neatly stored on the cloud that you can move over. So that is I wouldn't have even considered it a week ago, but now that is a major issue that I'm going to consider in the future, because obviously if I hadn't got the files off and I was away and I hadn't got access to the cloud because I hadn't got internet or something, I'd be stuffed. I would have had to delete some work and lose work to create that space. Anyway, that's just something that I wanted to mention that occurred to me this week. So that's an advantage for Artstudio. As you can see, the painting's building up now. I've got two very different looking oil paintings in Procreate and Artstudio. And now going into the watercolors, but you can see I also created a multiply layer and a highlight layer, or a screen layer, just to try to see how they both performed with highlights and dark colors, and they both perform very well. I couldn't find any decent watercolor brushes in Artstudio Pro, I have to say. So I used the soft oil brush for this demo, and it worked. It gave me a nice watercolor, but the watercolor brushes in Procreate, the actual default ones, are so much nicer and so much more realistic to watercolor than the Artstudio Pro ones. Now that it's not a big deal because you can import brushes, and I've exported my own brushes and put them into Artstudio Pro, which you can actually get, by the way, off my website. And you can also import any Photoshop brush into Artstudio Pro, which I'm not sure. I've never tried it in Procreate. I've never seen anybody that says you can do that. I know you can import all the textures in Procreate and set them up how you want. So you could probably cobble something together. But I mean, the brushes in Procreate are excellent anyway, and it's just that the default brushes in Procreate do have the edge, opposed to the Artstudio Pro ones, especially the watercolors. I love the wet brushes in Artstudio Pro. They blend really nice, and I have produced a nice oil painting in there. You'll see it. It's called Lady on a Bench. If you look through my videos, you'll find that. So comparisons then, what do I think? I would be very happy to use both of these apps. At the minute, for me, Procreate's got the edge with the brushes. I like the interface in Artstudio Pro. I like the fact that you can export the files automatically, or they're automatically exported for you, unlike the Procreate ones. But I would be very happy if somebody said to me today, you can't use Procreate anymore, you'd have to use Artstudio Pro. It wouldn't bother me a bit. I'd be, cool about that, and vice versa. So there are pros and cons about both. There are advantages to one over the other. And I think it would, at the end of it, it's down to personal choice. But for me, I really wouldn't want to call it. I think they're both excellent apps. So go ahead and try them both and see what you like. If you liked the fact that you can resize your paintings and crop them within Artstudio, that's an advantage. You can also add text in Artstudio, which you cannot do in Procreate. So that's another reason to get Artstudio Pro, although it is very limited. I tried it and it's not that sophisticated, but you can do it. You can put text in there, you can put drop shadows on and everything. So you've got that advantage. But in Procreate, you've got that mirroring tool as well. So pros and cons, two really first class apps. And I can't say one's better than the other. So there you go. That's it. I hope you found this video useful and informative. If you have, big thumbs up as always is much appreciated. And if you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, because I have lots of videos like this and I would love to be sharing them with you. So hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye.